the Prophet ﷺ then concluded that hadith on the strangeness. He said, Islam began as something strange, meaning that in Mecca, when it began, the Prophet ﷺ and his companions were very few. And their situation at that time is just like our situation today. They were looked at as strangers, like, who are these guys? What are they doing? They're going against the norms. They're going against our ways, the ways of our forefathers. And so they were looked at as being strange. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, it will once again return to being something strange, meaning that there will come a time when Islam will become dominant and that strangeness will go away. And that happened in the time of the Sahaba and for many centuries, until there will come a time when that strangeness will come back, and we are without a doubt witnessing that today. And then he concluded the hadith by saying, فَطُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَاءِ, then give glad tidings to the strangers. And so this is a message to us, basically, that remain a stranger. Remain a stranger. The Prophet ﷺ is giving us glad tidings, and whenever the Prophet ﷺ gives glad tidings, that means Jannah.
Character is think about a video game, think about a movie, think about a book. You have different characters. The character is the expressions, the actions, the personality, the traits of this individual. Good character would imply, obviously, that this person leads towards good. Bad would imply that they lean towards bad. But having character in general implies authenticity, or at least I would say good character implies authenticity.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the realest podcast in the dunya. You're joined today with the three regular hosts, the three Muslims, and we are joined today with Shaykh Kamil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you doing today?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. How are you guys?
Alhamdulillah, ya Rabb. Tamam, we're doing good. Subhanallah. So, first, Shaykh, let me ask, were you born in Canada, where we currently live?
Yes, I was born here in Toronto.
Toronto, mashallah. So what was Toronto like perhaps 20, 30 years ago before I was born?
Toronto was not too different, but from a lot of angles, things were very different. I would say, like, I grew up in the late 80s. And throughout the 90s. And things were not like they are today in the sense of the spread of Islam, I would say. Islam was starting to spread in terms of, us Muslims being a visible minority. We were not, I wouldn't say we were a visible minority then, but today we are. Like, almost wherever you go in the GTA, you find Muslims. In those days, it wasn't like that. Even if Muslims were concentrated in certain areas, even then, like, you couldn't tell that, we were a visible minority. Growing up, we're talking about pre-internet age. Forget about social media. There wasn't even any internet. And so things were much different than obviously with the internet age and the information age and then social media.
Okay, subhanallah. So my next question, I think like this question is begged. The pros and cons of living as a Muslim back then in Toronto or in the West in general versus the pros and cons of living as a Muslim today in the West. What would you say those are?
To be honest, Muslims living in the West, whether it was back then or whether it is today, we still face the same issues and the same obstacles practicing Islam, growing up here in the West, in the sense that many Muslims, still want to hide their identity. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to be seen as Muslims. They want to fit in. A lot of peer pressure. Like those things have not changed. What has changed, I would say, is there being more opportunities for the youth. In terms of more masajid, more centers, more activities. The youth have, more places to go to be with the Muslims than in those days. In those days, it was difficult, and maybe you would have one or two masjids who would be doing something, like who would even have a gym, for example. So I would say, in that sense, today it's better. But like I said, the issues are still the same issues.
Yeah. And I can say that 100%, someone who grew up in these same places. I myself didn't even start practicing being a born Muslim into a Muslim family. I didn't start practicing until 16, 17. It's because I came across a video on YouTube talking about like Iblis and Islam and all of that. And then subhanAllah, from there, I basically made Islam my surroundings and I went based off that. But, then that leads me to ask how many people actually had that experience, because subhanAllah, all these different ways of thinking that begin with secularism, liberalism, that are projected onto the Muslims. These are things that, are inherently, by definition, un-Islamic and that actually go against Islam. So how would you say those affect the Muslim youth and the older generations today?
Yeah, definitely. Living, I could tell you from my own experience. Although I grew up here, I left Canada at the age of 19. I went to study, and then I spent, the next, you could say, 17 years abroad studying. I could tell you, like, the huge contrast of living as a Muslim in the West versus living out as a Muslim in the East. Now, I'm not trying to say that there's no problems in Muslim countries. For sure, there are. Whenever we talk about the issue of hijrah, for example, migrating to a Muslim country, we get a lot of criticism for that, because it's like we're trying to say that there's a utopia out there and all Muslims should go and everything will be fine. I'm not saying that. Muslim countries have their own problems, but I will say that environment plays a huge role. Your surroundings play a huge role on your identity as a Muslim. So when we are here in the West, we are surrounded by, as you mentioned, these ideologies: liberalism, secularism, atheism, feminism, etc. And many times we Muslims, we will pick up aspects of these ideologies without even realizing it, without even noticing it. And that's only because we are, in that environment. If you were in a Muslim environment, you wouldn't pick those ideologies up. You wouldn't pick them up as easily. I'm not saying that, we don't have youth in Muslim countries who have not adopted these ideologies. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that they're a minority. Why? Because the surroundings play a huge role. And that's why the famous historian, Ibn Khaldun, who has his famous book, Al-Muqaddimah, he mentions in it that wherever you are, or in fact, he was mentioning in general, where you have a powerful nation and a powerful, dominant empire, let's say, civilization, those who are inferior, the other civilizations, the other nations that are inferior, their people will look up to the more superior nation and civilization, and they will follow in their footsteps, and they will imitate them, and they will want to be like them. So that is the case today. Muslims around the world, in fact, we are not superior. We have this inferiority complex. And so we want to be like the West. We want to adopt many of their, ways of life. And so imagine if you're living in the midst of that environment, such as here in the West, you're going to pick up these un-Islamic ideologies without noticing it, and then you're going to try to somehow try to bridge between these ideologies and Islam, and that's what we're seeing. Unfortunately, the Muslims, the vast majority of them here in the West, want to practice an Islam that somehow mixes between Western culture and their Islam. And the reality is that Islam has its own way of life, and many aspects of Western culture and civilization are completely anti-Islam. We have to say it as it is. We're not saying that we can't take the good from that civilization. We take the good as long as it doesn't contradict what our Deen teaches us.
Yeah.
So, Habibi, what was it like living in a Muslim country versus over here in the West?
Well, like I said, when you're in a Muslim country, you're surrounded by Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Let's forget about the fact that Islam is not being implemented the way it should be, and instead you have man-made laws in almost every single Muslim country. And you have aspects of Islamic laws, being implemented, but the reality is that the Sharia is not being implemented anywhere in any Muslim country the way it should be. Forget about the Muslim rulers. Forget about that aspect. Just the fact that you are surrounded by Muslims. You have masajid. You have the adhan being called. Wherever you go, you're greeting Muslims. Muslims are greeting you. Wherever you go, you have halal meat. You have restaurants. You don't have these issues that we face here as Muslims, where we are surrounded by the opposite. We are surrounded by the kuffar. We are surrounded by kufr. And so that aspect of Islam, that aspect of you practicing your deen, we could call it the social aspect. The social aspect of practicing Islam is much easier there. Is much easier there. And as for the other aspects, like I said, we're not talking about that. But just that aspect, it basically gives you a sense of identity, as I said, where you don't feel strange, you don't feel like a stranger, but rather you are a part of this ummah. You are a part of this ummah. And I remember growing up, my background is Pakistani, and my parents used to make it a point to take us back to visit Pakistan when we were very, very young, when we were kids. And I realized that played a huge role in me, wanting to later on go and live among Muslims in a Muslim country. And the reason for that is because of that bond that was, that was being built there for me, And then later on, I look at my, some of my friends who didn't have that opportunity, who grew up here, and not once did they leave Canada or the West. They lost that, and today they have no interest. They have absolutely no interest for going to a Muslim country. I'm talking about even the ones who later on started practicing. So they're practicing Muslims, but they don't feel that need to identify themselves with the ummah. That feeling of you belong to an ummah. was built for me from a young age. Why? Because I saw, my Muslim brothers and sisters in other Muslim countries. When you're living in the West, yes, I mean, we living in the West, we're living in a very multicultural environment where you have Muslims from around the world here, but it's completely different to go and actually visit those places and to see those places. And when it's done from a young age, it builds that sense of ummah in the Muslim.
So when did you go out there to start studying?
This was in, I would say, the year 2002. Yeah, so 2002. I went with my father for Hajj, and then from there I went to Egypt, and my father returned to Canada, and and then I spent some time in Egypt learning Arabic, and then I went to Saudi. I spent some time in Riyadh, and then from there I went to Medina, spending about 8 years in Medina. And then after that, I went on to a different university in Saudi, in a place called Qasim. Qasim is approximately 500 kilometers east of Medina, closer to Riyadh. And it's known for a place that has produced a lot of scholars. That was the hometown of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, who passed away about 20 years ago. And so I did my master's there. And I spent about 7 years there, 8 years there. And then I came back.
MashaAllah.
MashaAllah.
That's a long time that you were doing your studies.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
I was just about to ask about that. What was it like? Do you recommend that people go study there? What was the education and the timeline like?
Yeah, definitely. If one wants to go to study, I would advise that they pursue what we can call traditional learning with academic learning. And so, traditional learning, what I mean by that is going and studying under the scholars, sitting at the feet of the scholars, studying under them, traditionally, the various classical books. Academic learning is, the university style, where you have a structured program that you go through, etc. Someone who combines these two ways, obviously with a sincere intention, there is no doubt that he is basically treading the path of the scholars, and if he works hard enough, he will become a scholar. So yeah, I would definitely advise anyone who wants to go to study that they should do so. Obviously, things have changed dramatically in Saudi in terms of the course that they're going in currently, and so that has affected the universities, the learning, the studying, where unfortunately many of the scholars have been imprisoned. Many other scholars have been banned from teaching. These same scholars I'm talking about were out, and we benefited from them, over the course of the last, 15 years or so.
Wow. SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. So did the curriculum change?
Yeah, and the curriculum, they're saying it will be changing as well.
Wow.
I have not seen that. I mean, I left before all of these major changes, but from what I'm hearing, that's what they're saying.
Okay, so question. You have someone who's studying Islam, they're going deep into their studies, but they haven't done the actual proper studies underneath the scholars. And then you have someone who has, and then they become a scholar. Is there a big difference in terms of their studies, in terms of their intellect, in terms of where they're getting everything from? Or would you say it's roughly the same? It's just this one is accredited because it's underneath the scholars, while this one is not accredited, so they can't claim to be a sheikh or a scholar?
Look, when it comes to scholarship in Islam, it's not by how much you study. It's not by how many degrees you have, how many certificates you have, how many ijazas you have. It's not about how many scholars you could name as being your teachers. It's not about how long, how many years you've studied. It all goes back to the tawfiq of Allah in the end of the day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choosing a person to become a scholar. And that happens through two ways with regards to the person. And these two ways are, firstly, having the sincere intention, having ikhlas. And this is one of the most difficult things for the student of knowledge, because many times the student wants to go out on this path of seeking knowledge because he sees other, scholars or du'at, and they have status, they're looked up to. Some of them are celebrity scholars, and so they want to become like them. They say, okay, this is what I want to become. So they leave their home on the path of seeking knowledge, and this is their intention. This is a corrupt intention. They'll never become a scholar like that, because the intention from the very beginning was for the sake of the dunya. So the first thing, as I said, is sincerity of intention. The second thing is hard work. A person can be as sincere as he wants, but maybe he's lazy and he sleeps all day and he doesn't put in the effort. The effort comes in, as I said, through two ways: academic learning and traditional learning. So those who were with us, who studied with us, you had some who had put more emphasis on their academic studies, and they would pass all their exams. They would, they would always be getting, the top marks in class and whatnot, but they wouldn't go out of their way outside of the university to study on those scholars. And so they became what we could call academics. Today they're academics. They're good at researching. They're good at writing papers. And that's good. I mean, I'm not bad mouthing them. I'm not saying that this is not needed in our ummah, but I wouldn't call them scholars. We wouldn't call them scholars in the Islamic definition. Western definition of a scholar is someone who has a PhD, right? But that's not the case. In Islam, we don't call a PhD holder an alim, a scholar, but rather an alim is someone who has mastered all of the Islamic sciences. We're talking about all of them, from aqidah to hadith to fiqh, usul al-fiqh, the Arabic language, the Quran, all of that. He's mastered them. He's memorized these various mutun, these various classical books. And an important ingredient for being that alim is action. Being a scholar who practices what he preaches, who practices the knowledge that Allah has given to him. And that's where many fall short. That's one of the most difficult things after the intention. The intention is very difficult, and then also putting into practice the knowledge that you have.
Well said. All right.
Bro, one thing that popped into my mind was when you came back to the West, what were some things that initially, just hit you and you were just like, you got that little bit of a cognitive dissonance? Things that, when you were here, you were a little bit desensitized to, and then you really noticed it when you came back.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question, because that was the very first thing I addressed in my very first khutbah when I came back. And that is just the sins that surround us in this environment. Me coming from that environment, where I didn't see these things, even though I grew up with them. I mean, it wasn't something that came to me like, like, oh my God, what is this? I'm not talking about that kind of reaction, but just the idea that, wow, I'm back in this filth again. And the reason why I addressed it, I chose to address this topic in my very first khutbah, is because I knew that the majority of the Muslims are desensitized to many of these sins and to much of the filth that's out there. We're desensitized to it because we're living in it and we become accustomed to it. And I knew that before long, I will also become desensitized to it. So let me address it now before that happens. So I remember I addressed it, and the khutbah was about being aware of becoming desensitized to these sins that are around us and to the filth that's around us. And after the khutbah, the brothers, they said, we decided not to live stream the khutbah and to take it off because it was, they felt it was a bit too reactionary or too hard, and it might get them in trouble. And yeah, so I feel that even until now, I feel that these are issues that we need to actually be speaking about. And the reason for that is because if you have our imams and our khatibs only speaking about, let's say, doing good deeds, getting closer to Allah through different acts of ibadah, etc., without pointing out the dangers that we live in, then the Muslims, they'll never wake up. They'll think that, their surroundings, the filth that's out there, it's completely okay. They're already desensitized to it. They're already accustomed to it. They'll think it's not a big deal. And that's the reality that we live in, where, you have many Muslims, like our sisters, for example, who, they have a certain attire, certain type of hijab that they believe is completely okay. They think that the hijab only means a piece of cloth on your head, when and you could wear anything underneath. Some of them think that as long as my skin is covered, I can wear whatever I want, and they wear the tightest of clothes. And the Prophet ﷺ warned of a time that will come when there will be women who will be clothed. They'll be wearing clothes, but they're naked. And the scholars, they interpret that to mean that they're wearing skin-tight clothes. And the Prophet ﷺ, he cursed such women. He cursed them. So I'm just mentioning this as an example, one small example. Otherwise, the examples are many.
It makes me think about what Brother Faiyads says, where it's like Shaitan works in steps. And like, let's say you have music playing in the background, and this is just part of the culture, and you grow up, there's always music all around you. Maybe your parents are like, oh, don't listen to music, it's haram, but you're exposed to it. And after a while, you're going to be listening to it, and then you're going to become desensitized to it. And this all happens in baby steps, So it's like, let's say you get a fresh Muslim from the East, a Muslim country. They come over here to the West. You play them a song in which it's talking about sex, drugs, and killing people. And they'll be like, oh, astaghfirullah, like, turn that off. I don't want to hear anything like that. You have a born Muslim and I'm not trying to generalize everything, but this is for the example, the thought experiment here. You have a born Muslim, they've been exposed to this, they are desensitized, so now they can hear this song and it'll be playing in the background, but it won't even, they're not even reacting to it. To them, they feel like, you know what? I'm not listening to it. I'm not acknowledging what's being said. Like, this isn't what I listen to is in the music, but it's playing. You're allowing it to be in the background because you've become desensitized to it. It's because of those steps that this person went through that now they are open to this versus the Muslim that's like coming from the East. Like, he hears that, he's like, oh, astaghfirullah, he's going to get out of that environment. He doesn't want to be anywhere near that. So subhanallah, man.
That's very true, and that is how shaitan works. He doesn't come to you right away. He doesn't come to you and say commit zina, but rather he starts with the gaze, and that's why Allah Azza wa Jal commanded us to lower our gaze. Somebody may think, what's the big deal? Just a look, something so small. But that's where it starts from. And that's why in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal did not say, do not commit zina, but rather Allah Azza wa Jal said, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا, do not come near zina. Allah did not say, don't commit zina, but don't even come near it, meaning those baby steps, those steps of shaitan. And also, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ, do not follow in the footsteps of shaitan. Why did Allah Azza wa Jal call it the footsteps? Because that's exactly what it is. Shaitan, that's how he drags us into committing those sins. And so that's how sins, they destroy us. And that's why the scholars say that the minor sins that we look at as being insignificant, as being small, not a big deal, when they pile up and we are persistent in those sins, they are equal to a major sin. They are no different to a major sin. If we continuously persist in that sin and we don't care about it and we don't, ask Allah to forgive us for those sins.
And let me tell you something, man. Before I became Muslim, about a year ago, alhamdulillah, I had a very bad issue with my sexual desire with women, pornography and stuff like that. I actually went through this, they call it no-fap. The kuffar call it no-fap, where you stop doing everything for X amount of time, and it's like after that time frame, you can choose to continue or you can choose to just go right back to watching pornography and, touching yourself and all that stuff. One of the things that I realized when I was doing this, after failing repeatedly over and over and over and over again, is that if I didn't lower my gaze, it led to this snowball effect where it ultimately led into me relapsing and watching pornography. And it's like, now that I'm on Deen, now it's like, oh, I see it. I see the truth. It says it in the Quran where it's like, lower your gaze. And this is something that I was realizing just from going through those motions. SubhanAllah, man. SubhanAllah.
And that, I think that's what, even now psychologists, that's what they say, that you need to cut it out from the root and you need to completely stay away from it. And there is no way to stay away from it except by lowering the gaze. And that's the first step. And as Ibn al-Qayyim, he says that our sight is basically the arrow that shaitan uses to hit our heart, and that's how he comes to us.
Let's be honest. How does a man, I'm not even going to say a young man, because this is for every single man, how does a man lower his gaze, especially here in the West? You guys know for sure how difficult it is over here.
Yeah, definitely. I gave a khutbah on this a few weeks ago. Maybe it was in the beginning of the summer. specifically for that reason, because the summer was coming and it was important to address it. Basically, there's no doubt that there is no better way to do it except by realizing the greatness of Allah. When you realize the greatness of Allah and who Allah is, you will, have that consciousness of Allah, that Allah is watching me. And that's why in the ayah where Allah commands us to lower our gaze, what does Allah say? How does He end the ayah? And this is something I want to share with you guys, that the Quran is definitely miraculous. And, one of its miraculous aspects is the ending of the ayat. Why does Allah end certain ayat with certain attributes and names of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala? There's a secret behind each ayah. So in that ayah, tell the believing men, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ. Say to the believing men that they should lower their gaze and guard their private parts. That is purer and better for them. And then Allah says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ. Allah is well aware of what they do. Khabir means the one who knows, well aware. And the scholars say the difference between Khabir and Alim. So Alim means the one who knows as well, right? Alim means the one who has knowledge. Khabir also, it has that same meaning. But the difference between the two is that Khabir is someone who knows something very well. And that's why in the Arabic language, you say to someone who's a specialist in something, that he is Khabir. That he is a Khabir, he's a specialist, he's skilled at this particular thing. And in the Quran, Allah only uses Khabir to mention His knowledge of things that otherwise are unknown to most people. So when Allah says that He is well aware of what you do, it is signaling to us that yes, you'll be looking at those women thinking that those around you, your friends, didn't know what you were looking at, but Allah knew. So you secretly take a glance and you're with your friends, they didn't know, but Allah is telling you He knew. And so inculcating that idea of the greatness of Allah, that Allah is watching me, there is no better way for us to help ourselves to lower our gaze, and Allah knows best.
I think a big issue, and I'm gonna speak for reverts, because I don't know if it's the same for born Muslims over here in the West, but like I grew up with this thing where I was taught is like you should look at people in the eyes, you should look at people and acknowledge them. And I was also taught that like I should look at women, and if I lowered my gaze from women, it was either one, that I was gay, or two, that I was weak. And it's like now I have the Quran and my own experience from what I told you when I was trying to get rid of the pornography addiction, where it's like, look, lowering the gaze, Allah has decreed it for us. And my experiences showed me that lowering the gaze is essential. But then I have like this different narrative that I was taught that's like over here battling all the time, where it's like I see a woman and obviously my natural sexual desires, my inclinations, and this other narrative is over here like, look at her, acknowledge the presence, get attention, talk to her, go do this, go do that. But it's like, man, it's a huge battle. And again, I'm gonna speak for reverts here. I don't know if it's like that for born Muslim men.
Yeah, it's a struggle, and we just need to continue that struggle, and not give up.
I mean, bro.
SubhanAllah. So, in the last few minutes, I feel like this is something I wanted to mention earlier, but Anghels, some really, really good questions, mashallah. I feel it's important to mention some practical examples of things that we believe that were propagated by the West that we see as normal, right? This just being one of them, you know, the gaze, the glance, um, having, you know, boys, girls mixed together, men and women mixed together, not segregating. These are things that, like, if we call for segregation, like we're weirdos, basically, right? The same way if even if a woman wants to be a housewife nowadays, it's like that's weird, right? Polygyny is like you don't even say the word nowadays. But even things like mortgages, right? This is something that Islamically is not coherent, but it's so normalized, and it's that we have, you know, a different fatwas being given that are saying that I'm not here to give any fatwa. I'm not a scholar, right? I'm not. But we have different fatwas saying that, you know, you can get a mortgage, right, in this scenario, in that scenario. And that the Prophet ﷺ, he actually said that in a hadith that there will come a time where Muslims look to make men wearing silk, alcohol, zina, musical instruments, and he named some things. They look to make these things halal. And this is what we're seeing nowadays because of the West. And a few different hadith popped up in my head. For example, the Prophet, والسلام, he said that Islam began as something strange and it will return to something strange. And that's exactly what we're experiencing. Feeling otherized, alienated, like we are the weird ones, we're strange people because we don't adopt certain practices that these people adopt. And the other hadith of the Prophet والسلام, said that basically there will come a time where Muslims follow the non-believers so closely that if the non-believer put his hand in the lizard's hole, the Muslim would also put his hand in that lizard's hole. And exactly what Anghel was saying, you know, non-Muslims are saying, don't lower your gaze, look at the Muslims. And inevitably, when a Muslim does that, he's putting himself in that same lizard's hole because it opens up all these problems that every single man nowadays has to face. Subhanallah. I just wanted to share that quickly.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the Prophet ﷺ then concluded that hadith on the strangeness. He said, you know, Islam began as something strange, meaning that in Mecca, when it began, the Prophet ﷺ and his companions were very few, and their situation at that time is just like our situation today. They were looked at as strangers, like, who are these guys? What are they doing? They're going against the norms. They're going against our ways, the ways of our forefathers. And so they were looked at as being strange. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, it will once again return to being something strange, meaning that there will come a time when Islam will become dominant and, you know, that strangeness will go away. And that happened in the time of the Sahaba and for many centuries, until there will come a time when that strangeness will come back, and we are without a doubt witnessing that today. And then he concluded the hadith by saying, فَطُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَى, then give glad tidings to the strangers. And so this is a message to us, basically, that, you know, remain a stranger. You know, remain a stranger. The Prophet ﷺ is giving us glad tidings. And, you know, whenever the Prophet ﷺ gives glad tidings, that means Jannah. It basically means Jannah, whether it's mentioned in the Quran or in the Sunnah. Glad tidings means, it basically means Jannah.
Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Jazakallah khair. So powerful. Unfortunately, this episode's coming to an end, but there's one big question that I do want to ask. It may have been addressed early in this video, but that question is, we're strangers, right? As the Prophet ﷺ said, and may Allah grant us Jannah for it. Living in this time, how do we hold on to our deen? As the Prophet ﷺ said, that there will come a time where holding on to your deen will be like holding on to hot coals. How do we hold on to our deen?
Yeah, so basically, you know, it is difficult in the times in which we're living in. And, you know, the way to do it is by, first and foremost, seeking as much knowledge as we can. Because if we remain ignorant, then we're going to fall into those traps, you know, without knowing. Secondly, by implementing whatever we've learned. And thirdly, and this is something very important, by being around good company, by being in good company. I can't stress that enough. Shaitan, he comes and he takes a lone wolf. He is the lone wolf, and he takes the sheep that basically strays away from the jama'ah. And so you don't want to be that prey for the for the wolf, but rather you want to be with brothers. You want to be in good company, brothers who advise one another, who are constantly, telling one another about Allah, about the akhirah, reminding one another about that. Without a doubt, here in the West, that is something that we need more than anything else.
Jazakallah.
وإياكم.
So I have one final question, unless Fayed wants to go.
Take it away, bro.
My final question, Sheikh, if a man, let's say I'm walking down the street, and this is serious, please don't take this as a joke, this is serious. If I'm walking down the street and I see a woman, if our eyes lock, I can smile and basically acknowledge the presence, but then keep moving on. Would the gaze be considered when you're basically looking with sexual lust?
No. Basically, the gaze, it doesn't matter what kind of a look it is haram. And that's because, the various evidences that we have in the Quran and in the Sunnah, that the Prophet ﷺ, advised us to lower the gaze. And he said, I believe it was to Ali radiallahu anh, that the first gaze and the first look is for you. Meaning you're walking down the street and you see her. So that first sight is for you, meaning it is forgiven, it is pardoned. But then the Prophet ﷺ said, as for the second, it is not for you. Meaning if you keep looking, then now you're going to be sinful. So we're excused for the first look because, it was unintentional. But then if we persist in that look, even if it is without lust, it is haram because of what it will do. And so many times we think it as being harmless, insignificant, and this is what we spoke about earlier. That that's how Shaitan traps us. He says, "Oh, it's not a big deal. You're not looking with lust. Keep looking. But then where is that going to take you to?"
Very true. It's very true. Step by step. SubhanAllah, may Allah protect us all. My final closing statements is from my own anecdotal experience. Like I said, I started practicing when I was 16 or 17, and I didn't have brothers and people who would say Qala Allah, Qala Rasul, and really remind me of Allah, and have sittings where we just discuss Allah and Islam and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. I didn't have that. What I did have, however, was the Islamic lectures online and seeking knowledge and learning myself. So my advice to the people, because I know there are going to be the people that say, I just don't have anyone like that, I can't find anyone like that. Look for them. But until you find them, make this podcast your friend. Make the lectures and the good pious people online your friend, and become that person for yourself. The Prophet ﷺ, I'll end with this hadith inshallah, he said that loneliness is better than bad company, and good company is better than loneliness. Meaning that it's better to be alone than to be with bad people, yes, but it is better to be with good people than be alone. But if you must be alone, being alone by yourself is better than being bad, and you should be that friend, that khalil for yourself, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyaakum ya Shaykh Habib. Fayyad, Anghel, any final closing statements?
Take it away, brother.
All right. With that being said, it's been a lovely episode. If you want to see the lovely Shaykh Kamil again, or Kamil, pardon me, Shaykh Kamil again, I did it again. Comment, bring Shaykh Kamil back. And with that being said, Allahumma atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhab an-nar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
So in my eyes, character is think about a video game, think about a movie, think about a book. You have different characters. The character is the expressions, the actions, the personality, the traits of this individual. Good character would imply, obviously, that this person leads towards good. Bad would imply that they lean towards bad. But having character in general implies authenticity, or at least I would say good character implies authenticity.